Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another in my weekly sessions updates from the world of, I guess you would say, quantum biology, trauma healing, emotional healing. And today I want to do a book review of Mae-Wan Ho's The Meaning of Life and the Universe, Transforming. Notice the word beneath. Now that's quite a title for a book. The Meaning of Life and the Universe, Transforming. And I must admit, I had come across Mae-Wan Ho's work before in her first book, The Rainbow and the Worm, which is, she was a biologist who believed that physics, biophysics, was at the basis of all life processes. And she actually taught herself quantum mechanics, thermodynamics. You know, she didn't come to it easily, but she learned everything she could about this field that she felt was going to completely revolutionize our understanding. She had observed under the microscope that certain organisms, if they were subjected to light, would form rainbows, very much like the rainbow we see in the sky, which suggests a coherency. It suggests that things are lined up like a crystal. And so her eventual theory was that the body is a liquid crystal. And this has been confirmed subsequently in the, I guess it's nearly 10 years since her death. She died in 2016. But it's very much come to the fore recently as we've started to observe liquid crystalline properties of water in living cells. Some people call it fourth phase water. There are three phases normally, but there's a fourth phase in between liquid and solid, which is a gel phase, or sometimes called structured water or EZ water, depending on who you read. So we're getting corroboration, basically, that the body is a liquid crystalline system, self-organizing, and that biophysics, and particularly bioluminscence, the idea that the body harvests light, is at the basis of that. And that's why I wrote my book, Life Illuminated, which I wrote, well, funnily enough, a few years after this one, but probably 2020 or 2021, I'm not sure, it was around then. So I wanted to do a summary. Well, it's very difficult to summarize this book. This is a collection of papers. Now, that is, I think, its weakest point for me. There's a lot of repetition throughout the book, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if you really want corroboration of certain ideas. But it makes it rather difficult to read because it's been brought together and each chapter doesn't necessarily follow on from the next, and it may overlap some ideas, but its scope is absolutely vast. From development, psychology, ecology, art, biology. She covers everything. And I give you a flavor of it from some of the titles of her chapters, which I believe are, I guess, the titles of the papers these were taken from. Organism and Psyche in a participatory universe. All right, now that sets my heart beating fast. A participatory universe. All right, we're not just passive recipients of genetic endowment who just sort of muddle along living and then die. We actually create the world we see around us. This is being borne out by quantum physics now, that we actually interact with our environment in such a way as to make certain things more apparent and more likely in the field in which we're embedded. Okay, so she covers things like archetypes, Jung's archetypes, love and wholeness, how love is a vibration of connectedness to nature, and that far from being competitive beings that come into the world to survive at all costs, we're cooperative and participatory, and often it gives us a feeling of great meaning to love and help others, to serve, in other words, the evolution of humanity. And certainly I feel very drawn to do that myself. And so here's a kindred spirit writing from 2016. The true love of self is inextricably the love of humanity and of all nature. that is why we feel obliged to serve, to help, to alleviate suffering and pain, just as they were our own. And that's certainly how I feel, is that leaving someone in pain when there is an answer seems wrong. It seems morally wrong. And so I've set my life on this course now to educate and empower people to change their lives, to make a difference, to use their suffering, if you like. And talking of suffering, this is from the same chapter. So the whole is never static. It is constantly dying and rebirthing. As bodies, we're constantly in the process of disintegration, breaking down old cells, old mitochondria. In particular, they are very, very crucial for our functioning, and remaking them and reworking them and putting those parts back together again in a new form. Breaking down to build up again. And she says that these cycles continue during a normal, steady state of our existence all the time. The multitudes of infinitesimal deaths and rebirths are intricately balanced so that the old changes imperceptibly into the new. Now, so most of us are mooching along, in other words, completely unaware of this sort of subtle changes going on in our bodies. I mean, I've just celebrated a birthday, so I know all about the subtle changes. But then she says, and I think this is important, however, whenever the attracting center of the new, so she's talking about there is an energy to newness, if you like, to recreation, is radically different from the old. So there's an imbalance between what you're being in this life and who you are destined to be, or what you were given the gift of as possibility when you were conceived. So complete disintegration may be needed before the new can individuate. And we see that, don't we? We see that in caterpillars forming butterflies. They actually dissolve their innards in an extraordinary process, and then emerge with wings and as completely different creatures. So everything, it isn't just a rejigging of the interior, it's a complete dissolution and remodeling. And so I think the butterfly is always a bit of an image for rebirth, for recreation, for emergence. And I think that's what illness can be. Having been through chronic fatigue and working now with numbers of people who have been through a crisis of some kind in their life, the way it's put over in modern culture is that it's a disaster, it's terrible, it's uncontrollable, it's to be feared. You're sent into the labyrinths of the medical complex, if you like, to get testing and more fear and more waiting. And actually, it can be a process of inner work that's needing to be examined here, of needing to be achieved, is the idea of who am I and what is it I'm not expressing in this life. And that's what illness can be. It can be an opportunity to recreate more authentically the you that you've been hiding behind due to, sometimes it's what you learned as a child, sometimes it's early experiences in your adult life, but things that kind of knocked you off course from being the self that you're truly here to express. And so a journey back to authenticity is what I help people to do, because that's what I had to do. I had to find out where I was adrift, why I had gone off a path that my body felt was true for me. That incongruence will bring you to your knees, but it will also allow you to rebirth if you're willing and able to disconnect yourself from centralized medicine and look to natural healing and get help from people who understand this process, that there is no healing without a spiritual rebirth. There is nothing really that you can tackle fully unless you are connected with the wholeness of you, the wholeness. So that's another thing that she covers here. So she talks about individuation, so the concept of finding your individuality, of becoming this whole self, and the tendency towards the whole, that we are it's irrepressible. You know, you knock something off course and there is a tendency to want to move back. That's what homeostasis is, although more correctly it's now called allostasis. So it's this ability of a living complex organism to adjust its metabolism to sort of work within limits that are flexible but constrained. And so we are working towards wholeness always. I mean, really, I could go on and on about this book. Uh, Organism versus mechanism. You know, we're not machines. We are finely tuned, responsive, dynamic, self-organizing systems. And thus we have to treat our bodies with great respect. And when they do go off course, we have to examine at a fundamental level where we are complicit. Are we feeding ourselves, you know, poor quality food? Are we stressing over things that we don't need to, that we could drop some activities? Are we in relationship with people who drain us because we need to please or perform some act of service that we think we ought to be doing when in fact everything about us says no? Are we listening to ourselves, in other words? So I can't go through every chapter here because it's far too dense and there's so much in here that is reflective of her incredible vision. And I think there are some people in life who really broaden our ideas of what life is. I mean, Nassim Haramein, I've mentioned him before, definitely is one of those people. I would say Rupert Sheldrake, who wrote about morphogenetic fields. They're often considered pseudoscientists, the freaks, you know, woo-woo merchants. You'll see all these kind of descriptions of these people, and probably Mae-Wan Ho. Well, in fact, if you look up her Wikipedia, her article, she basically was derided in some quarters for being one of the first people to actually argue against the genetic idea that we're all just a product of our genes, the kind of selfish gene ideal. And that actually there are things that change the way that genes are expressed. And this has been borne out now by the term epigenetics. I don't think that was around when she wrote this book. She called it the fluid genome. In other words, that things can move and change as well as just being a static blueprint that just gets mindlessly read out. That's the machine idea of the whole Human Genome Project from the early 2000s, which was to map the human genome, all the paired bases of our DNA, in order to be able to isolate the genes that cause certain diseases and be able to eliminate human disease. It had a very noble aim, but it was very limited in its view of a static genome, that the idea that the coding in the base pairs never varied. You know, once you inherited it from your mum and dad, you just read it out, translated it into proteins, and then you were the results of that initial blueprint. And of course, nothing is further from the truth, as I've covered in other reviews I've done of Dennis Noble's work as well. So she was ahead of her time, for sure. Being a woman, I suppose people tended to listen less to her, maybe, than they did to people like Richard Dawkins, you know, and his idea of the selfish gene. And probably written, they were probably writing around the same time. And you can see that they were treated very, very differently. But we are reviewing her work, I think, now in the light of all the new physics that's coming out and some of the new biology as well. And I think the idea that she is putting across in this book, the biology of free will, I love this one. You know, that free will isn't just the idea that we choose what to do. It's an idea that that cells actually exhibit a sort of free will, if you like. They have the ability to move towards something or away from something. That free will is a much more nebulous concept, and we're seeing that now in the work of Nick Lane, for instance. That there is an agency or directedness to living organisms, large and small. And if you understand that we are an autonomous, coherent whole, that we our cells talk to each other, that our mitochondria signal to the rest of the body, and their DNA particularly has a very important signaling mechanism. So it's not all about the genes in the nucleus of your cell. You have this dynamic interplay between different genetic components, and they're always changing. So it's never static. We understand then that we have bioluminescence. We have light at the center of that. I recently recorded a video on the fact that mitochondria harvest light, and they also produce light at the end of the electron transport chain. We've always seen the electron transport chain as a really mechanistic series of proteins that sort of pump protons, and then out the other end, poof, you get some ATP, and that's your energy molecule. That's how I was taught. I had to learn each of the complexes and understand it, but nobody mentioned that light was in there, that biophotons are produced at the end, or structured water. Structured water, if you look at the final little spinning ATP synthase molecule at the end, which pumps out the ATP, we were only focused on the ATP. We never saw the other byproduct as anything other than waste. And that's water. But it's not the same as the water you drink, the bulk water that you drink. It's this fourth phase. It's this structured gel-like water that actually creates the right conditions in the body for all sorts of transport of ions and electrochemical reactions. Water is so central. And it's not just about hydration. It's about its electrochemical properties. It's about how it holds charge. It's about how it provides a layer around things to protect them, because it's a gel. It's not a liquid. It's not the same as the water you drink. And that might explain, I guess, why drinking loads of bottled water or tap water, or even if it's expensive, would not give us the quality of hydration in the cell that we really need. It's all about how well your cells are pumping, how well the mitochondria are working. And so I think she was definitely aware of the work of Gerald Pollack, for instance, on structured water, and she was talking about that way before I knew anything about it. And it's very sad that some of what she covers here is not taught. That quantum coherence, the idea that things can sync together, entanglement, the idea that we can, for instance, she talks here about the brain and the heart being in synchrony through the breath. And nobody has ever said how that actually works. Is it mechanoreceptors when we breathe in and our lungs expand? How does that feed a coherent wave to the heart, which then entrains the brain? Nobody's been able to explain that. Well, it seems it's a quantum phase locking. So I think this is all just fascinating stuff. If you're into science and living, even if you're not into science, I think if you're alive today as a human being, seeing the challenges we're facing, and you want some answers as to who you are and why life is a complete and utter miracle of wonder, I think this is a book perhaps to look at. But I would definitely start with The Rainbow and the Worm, which is her first book. And then she's written, I think there's 6 books altogether. The last one she wrote was about H2O. It was about water. I've not read that one. It was called Living Rainbow H2O, which is a really good title. But I hope to review that at some point when I've got that one. So, folks, it's such an interesting time to be alive. It's so amazing to learn some of this stuff and realize that we are composed of light and energized water, and not just a bag of molecules randomly bumping into each other. And I'm doing a few talks coming up. I'll be doing one for the Awakening Heart Collective in April. It's April now. And I'm also doing a talk for the Chrysalis Effect at their May conference as well. So plenty of information that I'm going to be putting over to people, and I look forward to giving you the details of those. I'll try and include the link when I have it to the Awakening Heart Collective talk, because that'll be open to everybody. And look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care. Bye for now.